Benvenuti e benvenute in questa nuova puntata di Museum Education Podcast, il podcast che parla di educazione museale. Probabilmente l'unico podcast in Italia che tratta esclusivamente questo argomento, chissà magari anche nel mondo, non lo so ancora. Bisognerebbe fare un po' di ricerche per scoprirlo in modo molto più attento e preciso. Bene, allora, era da molto tempo che non ricordavo a voi ascoltatori e ascoltatrici che questo è un podcast bilingue. Bene, oggi ce lo ricorderemo perché questa puntata sarà interamente in inglese. Ci sarà come ospite infatti Taylor Brittingham della Phillips Collection di Washington, dove ricopre il ruolo di Deputy Director for Education and Responsive Learning Spaces, quindi direttrice dell'educazione del Dipartimento Educativo e degli spazi relativi all'apprendimento, insomma all'educazione. Andremo a parlare di territorio, di comunità e di come queste interagiscono con il museo, di come poi il museo effettivamente possa trarne beneficio, comunque anche il ruolo del museo all'interno di questi contesti che sono poi i contesti in cui il museo fisicamente si va a collocare, quindi i cittadini che vivono all'interno della città, insomma, in cui c'è il museo. Bene, direi di non perdere altro tempo e tuffiamoci subito nella puntata. And here we are with the guest of today. So we're gonna have to give a big welcome to Taylor Brittingham from Washington, Phillips Collection. Hi, Anne.
Hi, how are you, Alberto?
I'm fine, and you know it's a long time that we don't see, so it's always nice to start with how are you, because also we are so distant, and I hope you are fine too in from the other side of the world.
Yes, no, thank you so much for asking me to be here today.
No, but thanks to you for being here today. Before we start diving inside the main topic, and I wanted to ask you, I mean, it's maybe a banal question, but many people here maybe don't know what a Phillips Collection, where you work, is, and who is Taylor Brittingham. So if you, I don't know, say something about you and the place that where you actually do the educational work.
Great. So I'm the Deputy Director for Education and Responsive Learning Spaces at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. The Phillips Collection is America's first modern art museum. It opened in 1921 by Duncan Phillips, who primarily collected contemporary American and European art. So we've been around for just over 100 years, right in sort of the center of Washington, D.C. In terms of who I am, I have been at the Phillips Collection for almost 3.5 years. Before that, I was at the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, Kentucky. Then before that, at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Then before that, the Frist Art Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. And then I started my career, I guess about 20 years ago now, at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles as a gallery teacher. So that was kind of my first introduction to museum education, was in my role at the Getty.
I wanted to ask you something first before going to the main topic, because I usually ask all the guests here something related to their work, to the work inside the museum. But before all the thing related to what we do inside the museum, I just ask because, you know, it's always different from people, from cultural ideals and everything. What exactly is museum education for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking about that before I logged on. So I think for me, as I sort of think about museums, kind of museums in general, I think we spend a lot of time being very object-centered. So kind of thinking about the art looking at and that we're presenting and we're preserving. And while I love the objects, for me, it's always been more about how to help people personally connect with the art. So I see museum education departments as being, I call them like almost like obvious audience advocates who work to provide these meaningful and lasting experiences with the public. So I think sort of at our best, museum education reflects the needs and complexities of our changing society. We're shaping our content and our interpretation to kind of be relevant to today and incorporate multiple voices, And we acknowledge that there's a variety of ways to do that, to provide hopefully sort of greater understanding and engagement with these beautiful things that we have hanging on our walls.
Well, that's a very interesting point of view, and also a very directly, because usually for me it's so much complicated to try to give a shape of what we actually intend for museum education. For example, in those few weeks I also discovered that in Belgium they actually called not the department of the education but participatory department, and I think that's very similar to what you said, also about we are always object centered, but it's like the main topic to connect people, to create the experience for making people actually go inside the museum and try to create a relationship with the object, with space, and with also other people inside. No?
Yes. So I think those connections that we can make with the objects, but then, as you said, sort of the connections that people can make with other people. I think there's really amazing opportunities within a museum to do really special things.
About relation, I always like this word because I think it describes most of our work, but also describes how I usually work even outside the museum, because I think relation is one of the main topics when we talk about people, because usually we have to be people-centered. And what I think is the most complicated thing for a museum is try to create a relation with the community of the city, because I see in Naples always a lot of difficulty to try to interact with the people of the city, because they usually are very skeptical, and you have to make a very specific way to interact with people. So it's always a hard topic to discuss within a museum, but also within the actual community. And I want to ask you, what actually do you think that should be the role of a museum in general that wanted to connect with the community inside the city?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think there's so many ways that museums can connect with community, and I think more and more it's becoming more essential for museums to make meaningful connections with their community. Makes me think about sort of this idea of placemaking, sort of our approach to planning, design, sort of management of public spaces, and sort of thinking about creating public spaces that promote people's health, happiness, and well-being, and sort of how the museum can be sort of in a unique position to be able to do that. So I think sort of back to your question about the role of museums, I think that they can build community by bringing people closer together, especially people that may not have things in common, sort of how they can what their role can be. I think the role can be to educate the public and broaden people's horizons and their perspectives. I think, especially in today's world, museums being a source of knowledge that people can trust is really important. I think they're places that can foster empathy, sort of demonstrate that diversity has its own value. Thinking about museum exhibitions, they can sort of change the way people think and feel. Museums can transform perspectives, sort of make us sort of think about and challenge sort of accepted norms of how we sort of think things are. And I think practically sort of the role of the museum within a community can foster economic growth, providing jobs. Museums that have ticket sales, they're sort of an economic engine within a city and within a community that I think provides value to that community.
And this is a very nice thing to put in perspective, because usually when we have to talk about interaction within the city, thinking about the economy that people gather inside from the museum and outside, and vice versa, it's not always like the first thing that people think about. So even when you try to make a connection with a store in a street near the museum, there's always at least here, a very skeptical way to see it. But for example, I wanted to say in one of my last travel in Belgium, I was in Ghent, and I had the opportunity to see the MSK museum. They had this public atelier, didactic atelier, which was it shocked me, because it was like the first time that I saw the work of 10 years maybe less, of the Department of the Education, like exposed inside museum, like it was actual artwork. So it was like a way to gather people from the city, because everything was made with the people of the city, and then people of the city were actually exposed inside the museum, so they had the occasion to coming back and see themselves not just as people that work together to create something, but create something just also for showing to other people. So it was like a very strong experience. So what do you think that maybe could have people together in such a place, the museum? Because, for example, this kind of action that I saw in Belgium, I think it was very, very strong. But I have to say, I have to be honest, in Italy it's very rare to see something like this, very powerful. And I don't know, maybe I know in America it's very different, the relation with the people, with the people of the city, but also with all I would say the didactic aspect. So maybe you can tell us more way to, last week I had a guest that said we should ask ourselves more why people should enter inside a museum, no? And so how many other whys can we have to try to gather together people in a museum?
Yeah, I think sort of what you saw on your trip, and just thinking about sort of what we're trying to do at the Phillips, anytime you can invite the community in and sort of create opportunities for them to see themselves reflected in the museum, I think just lets them see that the museum is there for them. So kind of things that we've done, sort of doing community labels. So instead of, all the sort of didactic text in the museum being sort of from the curator, asking members of the community to sort of write response labels to works of art. We had sort of teens write about Jacob Lawrence's struggle series and then record them as audio stops. So again, kind of their words and their perspective coming through in an exhibition. Doing community exhibitions. So back in 2020, I did a Community in Focus was what it was called, an exhibition where we invited members of the community to submit one photograph from their sort of 2020, as we all were kind of processing and thinking about this crazy year we had had. And then we made it a digital exhibition where we showed it at the museum and showed it at a couple of other sort of satellite locations around the city, but then also it was available online. And so again, just giving the community the chance to contribute to the exhibitions that are on view at your museum. So in education, our student exhibitions are really important. So right now we have a photography exhibition that's up with elementary school students, middle school students, and high school students, where they were responding to our exhibition that's on view, Frank Stewart. He's a contemporary photographer. So they looked at his work and then sort of thought about it through their lens and took their own photographs, and they're exhibited. And then when you have sort of community exhibitions or student exhibitions and you invite the families to come, it invites them into the museum to show that we sort of want them there. And, we're showing their family members' artwork. And so we hope that they will see that it's a place that really cares about them. I think it's building those relationships. It starts with those one-on-one relationships, those human interactions that you have with people. I think people connect to the people at a museum, even more so than the museum itself. And so if they feel like they're welcome, they feel like it's a place where their ideas are valued, where their art or their work are valued, they will see it as a place that is for them.
And those photographs that children took inside the exhibition are actually exposed, maybe try to connect with the actual artwork, curating a dialogue, or they're just like temporary in a separate room or something like this?
Yeah, exactly. So, they're on view at the museum. And then, as I said, it's a digital exhibition, but it's the students' dialogue with Frank Stewart's artworks. But then, like you said, they're in dialogue with each other as you see the artwork on view next to each other. And then they become in dialogue with us as, they were thinking about sort of the view. I think photography is so interesting as you think about sort of the lens through which we view things, sort of literally and figuratively. So literally sort of what you see through a viewfinder, but then sort of how what you see can kind of be changed and transformed by seeing what other people are seeing. So kind of that idea of sort of differing perspectives and shifting perspectives, and that lens that we see the world through. Again, sort of getting a taste of that through the student artworks to help us then maybe go back and see our own world differently. And so just thinking about, again, ways to sort of connect with the public and sort of activate the public to get them interested in our work in July. We're doing a photo a day challenge. So again, every day there'll be a photo prompt where we encourage everyone, we have these, phones that take amazing photographs. Kind of challenging everyone to take a photo a day based on the theme that we give them and then share that photo back with us. So again, kind of how do we then have people share with us and then share back with the larger community these images that have been shared. So again, just constantly sort of thinking about ways to kind of connect with the public and sort of help them feel like I said at the beginning, that their perspectives are valued and that we want to bring them in and create these opportunities for them to see themselves there.
Well, I cannot agree more because, it's something so simple, but sometimes it's so hard within... when you work with the right people, it's something very simple to make, and the result, of course, it's astonishing. And I wanted to ask you also about the schools, because one of the main reasons we start creating relation within the city and with the city, it's also for creating relation with schools, because of course schools are one of the main, how can I say, houses, the second houses of students, but also the second houses for many people, because of course they will take a lot of time in a life of someone. So usually working with schools is like working with community, working with city. And how do you see about maybe some difference within the work with the actual city, outside? Because I also remember that Phillips Collection have a satellite site that works literally inside the city, which I found amazing. But also, you work with schools and you work with a very specific method with schools.
So we work with schools across DC, sort of in Northern Virginia and Maryland. As you said, we have a location, Phillips at the Arc, which is kind of across town, sort of across the river from sort of where the Phillips Collection is in Southeast DC. And sort of we have schools around Phillips at the Arc that we have sort of long-term relationships with. And so I think schools are such an important sort of entry point for getting people comfortable in an art museum. I think I read some statistic years ago where it said, sort of people who as adults are considered sort of museum advocates and who say that museums are important to them, a huge percentage of them had a seminal experience with a museum between the ages of 7 and 9. So kind of thinking about how we can get students, that's how they can come to us, and then we keep them engaged. And then thinking about how we can sort of turn a student visitor into a family visitor is something that I feel like there's so much opportunity, again, to think about sort of building your audiences, starting with the groups that come. Their teachers have booked their tour, they come on their field trip. That helps them feel like they're comfortable. It's great when students start to feel like they have sort of artworks that are almost like friends, they recognize and they sort of and get to know them in the same way they get to know a person. But I think sort of building that level of comfort with the museum, and again, helping students to feel like museums are for them, pay lifelong dividends as they become sort of adults who feel an investment with a museum.
Well, yes, of course. Okay, and I just wanted to ask you one last question. I would like to ask you just maybe something to suggest people that want to make this career path, maybe a book, maybe, I don't know, a way to start making this job, even though of course the measure of my audience is here in Italy. Of course there are a lot of things that go on the same path where we're talking about museum education, because museum education, as you said before, it's like creating experience, try to connecting people and stuff like this. But usually when we are inside the museum doing the actual work, it's much more, because it's not only about studying museum education, but also other stuff.
Yeah, I think the great thing about museum education is that there's so many different ways that people can come to it. So, for me, my background was more sort of, I studied classical studies and art history, but, people who are artists, sort of come to museum education, people who are writers. So I think, kind of that idea of sort of valuing the diversity of experiences that we sort of do with our audiences, it's reflected in our field as well, where you can bring sort of all of these experiences that can help people connect with works of art or sort of whatever it is, the type of collection you're working in. And so I think for people who are interested in this as a museum field, I think just talking to people, kind of making connections, with people in the field, talking about their jobs. Now more and more in America, it's great that museums are offering paid internships and fellowships. I think for a long time, it was sort of the unpaid internship. But now I think museums recognize that they need to pay sort of students and sort of earlier in their career professionals for this work. So kind of looking at where there's internship opportunities, sort of job opportunities to kind of think about the work that you're doing. And then I think in terms of places, if you're interested in museum education, sort of finding the museums that really value education, in that work, so that that the work that you're doing is sort of valued and appreciated at all levels of the museum. And then in terms of reading, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just, there's lots of great books. I just was reading sort of Designing Museum Experience by Mark Walhimer, Storytelling in Museums by Adina Langer. So kind of things that I just ordered and I'm kind of just starting to read. I think storytelling is such an amazing sort of opportunity in museums, is sort of how we capture and how we tell these stories. So I think, I think it's just kind of talking to people. I think for the most part, people in museum education are always happy to kind of have a conversation or grab a coffee if you live in the same place. But I think build your network, sort of think about the places that you want to go. For me, I think earlier on in really for a big portion of my career, I was kind of willing to move, wherever there was a job. So I think kind of personally kind of looking at sort of your life and sort of your ability to move for a job. And then if you're kind of in a city, and that's where you are, that's where your family is, and that you're not moving isn't really an option, that's where, again, you can build your network within that place to really kind of be ready for when something becomes available. So I think there's a lot of different approaches, a lot of different backgrounds and experiences that you can bring to museum education. I think it's just kind of thinking about what makes the most sense for you. And I think sometimes, at least for me, you can't really like map it out. I don't know. I think it's sort of looking back, I can see how the pieces fell into place sort of with my career. But, when I was, 23 years old and starting to think about looking for jobs, this is not what I would have mapped out. So I think it's also being open to sort of the things that come along and sort of where your professional journey is going to take you.
I really appreciate what you are saying right now, because a lot of people usually write to me asking me how to start, and that's why I always ask every guest this question. And it's really interesting that you say to me that talking to people, trying to discover more things, and then trying to understand and everything, it's very important also that you're saying trying to create something also related about, because I am also thinking about moving, so it's a very important question. Can I ask you if you were actually, you are actually from Washington, or you moved from another place?
No, I'm originally from Columbia, South Carolina, so I grew up in the South, and then, like I said, my jobs have taken me sort of all over, so like I said, out in California, Nashville, Tennessee, Louisville, Kentucky, Washington, D.C. So I've always sort of moved for my jobs, but originally from South Carolina, down in the American Southeast.
But it's a long trip, or it's like it's near?
From Washington, it's about an 8-hour drive to get to my parents' house.
Okay.
So, it's drivable, I guess.
Okay.
Which a lot of Americans. You can get there in about an 8-hour drive.
Okay. No, I asked you this not because I wanted to make your I want to know your life, but because it's actually, as I was saying before, trying to understand what maybe we can do to start this this work, because a lot of people ask me this, and why maybe staying or travel to another place. It's a very common question that I think every young person that want to make this job about, I mean, every cultural job, maybe art job, maybe they will ask themselves at least once in a life. So it was very, very interesting. So really, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Earlier in my career and sort of earlier in my life, I was sort of willing to move or go anywhere. And I always felt like if I had sort of made the wrong decision or chose something that didn't work out, there was still sort of time to course correct in terms of my life. And I guess I feel like now, as I'm, sort of more middle-aged, approaching middle-aged, kind of, and I have a family, so it's just those decisions become harder, as it's easier to make a decision to move across the country when it's just you and you're only thinking about yourself. But, and circumstances change in life. And so you have to kind of make adjustments based on where you are. But I think, like I said, I think the great thing is there are so many different ways to sort of get to where you're supposed to end up. And it's kind of the journey that you take along the way. You don't always know where it's going to go, but it's nice to sort of look back and see how the pieces fell into place.
Yeah, that's a very, very nice way to see it. And also, even when people want to really stay in maybe their hometown, that's why also creating relationship within the city is also very important, because with the community there can be actual a way to create something, a valuable cultural engagement with people.
Yeah, and I think if it's the place that you've grown up, you are the community, so you kind of know better than anybody sort of what you want for your community, and you can be a part of shaping and building that. I mean, that's, I think, an amazing position to be in, to sort of be from a place and to sort of see sort of what you want that place to be and then be a part of building it, I think is amazing. I mean, part of me wishes that I lived sort of closer to my family. Just like I said, I think there's pros and cons to every choice that you make in your life, but when you're from a community, you're living in a community, you have sort of family and friends there. It's sort of a different support system than, when you're moving, starting over, meeting people, they're different. But I think, if you're from a place and that's the place that you want to stay, that place and you can develop the things that you feel like you want to see in that place.
Absolutely. Well, and I really wanted to ask to say thank you, because now I'm getting emotional, because this is much more related to my life right now than what you can imagine. So, no, really, thank you for being here today. It was really, really important and really nice.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for inviting me. I always love having the opportunity to connect with you, and I'm so glad that we've stayed in touch, after our sort of two times seeing each other in Naples. So it's special to me to be able to kind of keep the connection with the work that we were doing through the Phillips Collection with museums all over Italy and sort of meeting with different people across Italy. So like I said, I'm so glad that we've been able to stay in touch. So thank you so much for having me.
No, but thank you. Thanks to you, and also thanks to the podcast, because the podcast born for creating connection within people, to maintain the connection with people. So I think it's very important also.
Yeah, no, thank you. This was great.
Well, I hope that maybe next time that we hear and see each other will be maybe, I don't know, in Washington or again in Naples. And
yeah, no, I hope so.
Okay, thank you, Anne, and I don't know, see you very soon.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see each other soon.
Okay, bye Anne.
Bye, thank you.
Bene, per questa puntata è tutto. Io come sempre vi ricordo che in descrizione di questo episodio, sia su Spotify che su YouTube, trovate tutti quanti i link dei vari musei insomma citati, dei testi proposti e anche delle varie insomma attività di cui si è discusso all'interno di questa puntata. Troverete tutto quanto nella descrizione dell'episodio. Vi ricordo inoltre che il podcast, come vi dico sempre, è un prodotto realizzato da zero, interamente da me, quindi non è supportato in alcun modo da nessuno se non dalle persone che ascoltano questo podcast, quindi vi raccomando, insomma, condividete, insomma, cerchiamo di far crescere sempre di più questo nostro progetto, che è un progetto che mira soprattutto a creare una rete in questo settore. E niente, io vi ringrazio di averci seguito, speriamo di rincontrare Anne nuovamente presto, vi auguro buona domenica e ci vediamo come sempre domenica prossima per un'altra puntata di Museum Education Podcast. Ciao!